Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Leona, and on behalf of everyone at Better Ed Than Dead, we are so pleased to see you on Zoom tonight to celebrate Sarah Krasnostein's newest release, The Believer. Sarah is joined in conversation by Michaela Kolowski. Before we begin the proceedings, I would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet. These will be different depending on where you're zooming in from. For me, it is the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. It is upon their ancestral lands that Better Ed Than Dead is built. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Now, before we begin, just a little bit of Zoom housekeeping. You'll notice that there is a mute or unmute option on the lower left corner of your screen. We ask that you please keep yourself on mute just to prevent feedback and background noise from disrupting the conversation. When we move to the Q&A, please type your questions into the group chat and Sarah and Michaela will answer them via video when the time comes. You can also buy a copy of The Believer in store or on our website. It's front and center on our homepage and you definitely should. We're delighted tonight to have Sarah Krasnostein in conversation with Michaela Kolowski, who is an interviewer and a moderator. She's a regular interviewer at Ideas and Writers Festivals and for bookstores, universities, and local councils. She's recently interviewed Margaret Atwood, Colin McCann, Trent Dalton, David Mitchell, and Julia Baird. And in 2020, she also curated the Big Weekend of Books, ABC Radio National's first ever on-air Writers Festival. Such an honor to welcome you here tonight, and I'll throw it to you to introduce Sarah. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Leona. Good evening, everyone. I am Michaela Kolowski, and it's such a great pleasure to be here in conversation this evening with Sarah Krasnostein about The Believer. As Leona said, we will definitely make time for your questions at the end. Sarah and I will speak together for about 45 minutes. So if you think of a question as we're going along, feel free to pop it into the chat box and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. I want to tell you about I want to give you Sarah's bio before we begin, not only because it's impressive, but also because it's relevant to The Believer. She is a writer, obviously, but also a researcher, which is kind of the first thing she started doing. But she's probably best known in terms of her writing for her best-selling and award-winning book, The Trauma Cleaner, which came out in 2017, an extraordinary hybrid sort of work of nonfiction. Her work has also appeared in publications in Australia and around the world. She won so many awards for The Trauma Cleaner. I can't possibly go through all of them here, but they included New South Wales Premier's Literary Awards, the Victorian Prize for Literature, and many others. She also has a PhD in criminal law and was admitted to practice both in New York and in Victoria. And she's lectured in criminal law and creative writing as well. And she was born in America. If you don't already know that, you'll hear that when she speaks. But she's based in Australia and she's worked in both countries. And in this book, The Believer, she's interviewed people in both countries. This book, before we get going, is, for those of you who haven't read it yet, is really an exploration of the power of belief, about the gap between the world as it is and the world as we wish it would be, and the things we use to bridge the distance, from belief in the devil and God, or UFOs and ghosts, or the view of how the world was formed, taken from the Bible literally. Sarah's brought together 6 stories from people whose lives on the surface couldn't appear to be more different than they are. But the more we read about them, the more we come to understand that they're all contemplating the same big questions about faith, about meaning, and about life. This book is kind of a call to arms, I think. It puts questions of faith and belief at the center of everyday life, and it encourages us as the reader, if we haven't already, to think deeply about those questions. The book is also a sort of primer for how we might start to consider those big questions. What is death? What is life? What is the self? And how do we live a meaningful life? Sarah's writing is full of compassion and it's non-judgmental, it's empathetic, it's full of her curiosity, and also has this extraordinary intimacy that she shares when she talks about her own life and her own experiences. The book is also not neat. It's meditative and it doesn't force any answers to come together. It leaves a lot of room for you, the reader, to reflect. So tonight I want to ask Sarah to talk about how she found these extraordinary and ordinary stories and people who she writes about in The Believer, the quite unusual structure of the book as well, fanaticism, magical thinking, death doulas, and I also want to ask her about her own meditations on meaning and reality and belief. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Happy to be here.
So I wanted to start with, I guess, a kind of structure question. As we said, the book is 6 stories of 6 different people, and they're not all told sequentially. And you write very beautifully at the beginning of the book. They're like 6 notes, 6 stories that are 6 notes, and the 7th, which is the whole book, is kind of this. It makes a chord together. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how the 6 stories connect for you.
Yeah. So, I didn't start with that kind of intention. With both books now, and kind of with everything I write, I start off with the story or stories themselves, and that kind of little nugget of I need to know more about what I'm seeing. And it's not really I mean, maybe it's a journalistic inclination or a writerly inclination, but it just in that moment feels like a compulsive personal curiosity. So I found the Mennonites first. They're, excuse me, not used to speaking out loud yet. Again, it's been a long 4 years of writing privately. Yeah, I found the Mennonites first, and they look so visually striking. They dress like Amish. They are, very closely related to the Amish, and it looked like something from, another historical era. And the sound they were making was so beautiful, and I just really needed to know more about that. And they were the ones that told me about the evangelical PhD scientists at the Creation Museum. And the time that I spent at the Creation Museum got me thinking about, this narrative of death and all of these, high functioning adults talking about death has to be understood as a punishment for sin. And that led me on to the death doula. And well, I was looking for a more kind of skilled or practiced way of confronting that inevitable fact of life. And so each of those stories kind of led on to the next. And like I had said it earlier in the book, they all made the same sound to me. And it was this kind of longing, this vulnerability at the heart of these very, watertight stories that they had built up, these certainties, which were very different on the surface. But what it felt like they were actually saying in each of the conversations we'd have was something about human vulnerability that was actually making the same note. So I wanted to do something in the structure that mirrored the content of the book and kind of the thinking of the book, which was how could we, knit these very different things together in a choral structure so that their differences would actually play off against each other. There might be echoes and correspondences and harmonies in the emotion of what they were saying. And so that was the kind of challenge that I had set myself as the stories progressed later on.
While I said in my intro, and I said it a few times, the book's about meaning. It's about how we make meaning of the lives that we live, the lives we think we're living, the lives we want to be living. But it seems that, and it's not a counterpoint to that, that running all the way through the book is this extraordinary exploration of grief and loss. Yeah. And also what happens to us when we don't talk about the things we're frightened of losing. Can you reflect a bit on that? Because that seemed to came up in everyone. It came up in the people who were wondering if the ghost they were seeing in their building was someone who loved them or someone who was there to give a message. It came up with the people who were the Mennonites, as you talk about, who believe that they can survive this world. This world doesn't matter so much because they're going somewhere more important. So it's almost like their way of coping with their own sense of grief is to just pretend they're not here.
Yes. So I think that was also part of the sound that they were making was really this grief that was, either about a lost certainty or a lost expectation or a loss of comfort or safety or a sense of justice that you're going to be rewarded if you just do all the good work. And I think that, that's intractably interwoven with our human vulnerability. There's a psychoanalyst who uses Buddhist techniques. He has a beautiful book called Already Free. His name is Bruce Tift, and he writes about annihilating vulnerability that we all carry and how, we build up this armor of certainty, like a shell of certainty around it. So, I do all the legwork first. I spend as much time as I can getting as close to the story as possible. And then I have to do this very counterintuitive intuitive thing for me, which is not do it lightly, more lightly. My impulse is, to very loyally or very type A to do it harder and go in and do, but you kind of have to let the stories breathe and see what they're saying. And those commonalities were kind of these stories about grief, people having to let go, or in some places cling more tightly to the shitty parts of the world as it is. What do you do with injustice? What do you do with death and illness and uncertainty and lack of control? And I think it's a natural process developmentally, at least that the child comes to terms with all of these things. But in many sense, I think we remain children in our thinking for some of us our whole lives, probably most of us our whole lives. And my interest was, well, what do we do next? What could we do with the fact that we were all feeling the same way?
I think we can't go much further without actually getting you to talk a little bit about some of the people who are in the book, because they are, as you've said as well, extraordinary and ordinary, and they really are both. In the first, so the book is also divided into two sections. People haven't read it yet. The first section is called Below, and the second half is called Above, and it's considering, the Below is focuses on a death doula and focuses on people who believe in creationism, and the Mennonites who we meet in the first section as well. And in the second half, which we'll get to in a moment as well, is about Above, and it's about UFOs, and it's about people, lost in airplanes and those kinds of things. But I wanted to focus a bit, if we could, I think we should talk about the creationists, because I thought you just talked before about the way that, it's a natural evolution psychologically that we think about the world, we try and make sense of the world, we learn about the world theoretically, and we live in the world, and then we kind of grow up. But you met people who are, and there's no judgment maybe a judgment implied, but in what I'm saying is that you met people who have a very different way of making sense of reality. And some of them were even Australians, even though you met them overseas in Kentucky. Yeah. Can you talk a bit about the creationists? And we have to talk about the Ark as well.
Oh, yeah.
Please explain the Noah's Ark that you walked in for us.
I had a very, very pleasing buffet lunch at a restaurant in the shadow of a life-size Noah's Ark in the middle of Kentucky. Well, it's northern Kentucky, but in Kentucky, it's a life-size Noah's Ark built according to the dimensions in the Bible. And the Ark is affiliated with a place called the Creation Museum, or more accurately, Creation Museum. I wouldn't say it's actually a museum in the sense that many of us would come to expect of an institution that bears that name. But both of them are part of the Answers in Genesis ministry, which is a non-denominational Christian evangelical ministry that's was established by Ken Ham, who was a former science teacher from Brisbane. And the ministry is devoted to proving the literal veracity of the Bible in general, and Genesis in particular, as the foundation for kind of a biblical worldview in the lives of the people that kind of follow them. And so there's kind of two purposes to these places. One is to kind of push this idea that the evidence of the Bible is stronger than any evidence that science can provide. And also science supports the idea that the Bible can be taken literally. So there's a bit of cognitive dissonance there. And that was what got me interested. The Mennonites pointed out, they told me about it. They had spent their holidays there the previous year. So when I was doing more reading about it, the thing that really hooked me was that they had PhD qualified scientists on their staff, in particular a microbiologist and a geologist who had specialized in uranium, and he was another Australian. And both of them were devoted to this mission of, proving that the world was literally created in 6 days. And I just, my intention is not to make fun of them. It's not to approach it cynically. All of those, jokes and mocking it's very easy. My interest was more on, again, this kind of, at first, very contradictory impulse of coming from an academic background and yet devoting yourself to these propositions that were at odds with any facts that I knew. And so, so what I learned there was that it was very important to them, individually and professionally and in their lives, that this narrative that, death exists as a punishment for sin because otherwise we'd have a unjust God and nothing makes sense. And then it had to make sense. And there's something in that really kind of resonated with impulses in me that, it has to make sense. If I just try harder, I'll be able to understand. And I think that's a very human impulse. And so, yeah, that's how I ended up at the Creation Museum.
I should say, and it's a question for you as well, that something that's very striking, and I think for people who haven't read the book yet, what you start to learn is, that the other people you meet in the first half of the book are people who really believe in the paranormal, and they're all, as Sarah's indicated, many of them have, degrees from well-respected, well-regarded universities. They're writers, they're researchers, they're people who've been taught how to take information, pull it apart, and make sense of it. Is that, and you give us all their stories, and you give it to us, the reader, without any judgment. There is your own take on things, but I wondered if you could reflect as a writer of nonfiction, how you find that voice where you are exploring and presenting in your book all these ideas that you don't hold to be true, but you don't do it like a journalist. You're not standing so far back from it and pretending like there's objective and non-objective, which would also be judgmental. You're genuinely. Also, how do you sit with people whose views you really personally don't agree with, and find a way to put them at ease and be an interviewer in a way where you can get this all onto the page for us?
Yeah, I mean, the first question, it's the only voice I have access to, that voice. So voice is
thank goodness.
I don't struggle with voice. I struggle with pretty much every other part of writing. But voice was the thing that was just that's my actual voice. And then you get into that whole issue of, is that a character? Is that just stylistic, or is it genuine? It's partial, it's subjective. I'm always, making choices about what to put in, what to put out. But to the best of my ability, it reflects the truth of what I was seeing and understanding. So I have, journalistic standards in that regard. But I always prefer a first person point of view. That's, true of everything I read. I want access to that filter through which I'm getting the information. I want to hear why, or get some sense of why the writer's, chosen to put her lens here and not there, why she's making sense of something in one way and not another way. So I think, putting yourself in there allows the reader to make those judgment calls for themselves. They might agree, they might not, but at least they have that information. And, I do think it's a more honest way of writing nonfiction, given that it is an inherently selective enterprise. And that's what makes, any book or the story of an event or of a life different from the life or event itself. So you're always doing the selection process. And if you do this, seemingly neutral, impartial, third person, omniscient perspective, eye of God, I don't think that's, as honest as just putting it out there that this is me, this is what I'm saying. That said, people are going to always say, oh, you put yourself in the text, it's so narcissistic. As if there's anything more narcissistic than purporting to be the all-seeing eye of God. And this is, the impartial third person. Anyhow, that's just me. And now you have it. How I get the access is I don't badger people. If they're not into being written about, that's the end of that. So there are many other stories that I would have liked to have followed and that I didn't get access to. There are stories that I did start, but then the access wasn't as close as I had wanted it to be. I wasn't really going to get anything that you can get from just doing a Google search. And so those don't make it in. And I don't know. I mean, I'm always going to feel like I didn't get close enough. That's the thing. I don't know any authors who are happy with what they've done or feel like it lived up to the goals they had set for themselves for the work. I get, very close to subjects and I always feel like, oh shit, I wanted to ask about this and that, and I want to know about this and that. And I always, I have the ideal of what I'd like it to be. And then there's the hard reality of what you're going to get. So, and that varies with everyone. So Annie, those conversations went over nearly 3 years. Lynn, nearly 4 years. Kentucky, that was a week of interviewing, and the Mennonites were a few months. So it's going to depend on each situation. And how close you get really depends on each of the personalities, their reasons for letting you in. And it's got its own dynamic. And I don't have prepared questions. I mean, I have a few, who, what, where, when, why sort of things. But mostly my interviews are conversational, and they take place over time, so that I can always circle back to something and think about it more in depth. Because learning about someone's life is like, learning about any system. It's like, a hand doesn't make sense unless, it's attached to the arm and the torso. So you have to start somewhere. But that's the benefit of forming an ongoing relationship, is that you kind of have access to the context, the broader context.
I want to talk about a few more people in the book as well. When I've spoken to people about the fact that I was reading The Believer and how much I was enjoying it, they said, oh, that's the death doula book, isn't it? It seems to have already become associated particularly. So I want to ask about Annie. As we said, she's a death doula, and that I think that is, for people who don't know what it sounds like it is, but what does that role entail for Annie, and what struck you about her? What was unusual for you about Annie?
Yeah, so it was not a role, like, out of interest. Did you know what a death doula was before you read this book?
I was lucky enough a year ago to moderate a panel on death, dying, and grief. And it was the first time I'd heard about death doulas and death cafes, or people who know that they're dying in a period of time, 6 months, 12 months, in some way, it can come together and talk about their life and how they want the end of their life to be. But no, it was the first time I've read in detail about what kinds of things a death doula does. And it's interesting. Every time I say the name of this book, that is so much what people want to hear about, which I think says a lot.
Yes. Oh, that's fantastic to hear. Yeah, it was a total surprise to me. And it was only kind of coming back from Kentucky and thinking, well, I know death is a bad thing, or like a sad thing, but does it have to be like a punishment? Like, surely there's a better way of conceiving this. And through fairly labyrinthine Googling process, I found death doulas. I didn't find Annie first. I spoke to a number of other death doulas before I came to Annie. And basically, as I learned, by doing this, I hadn't heard of it previously at all. They are professionals who assist the person dying in the same kind of spirit as a birth doula would help a woman giving birth. So it's kind of bespoke depending on the needs of each person, but they can, liaise with doctors and hospitals, talk about different options for the type of death that the specific individual would want. If they want to die at home, what that's going to entail, wishes for their funeral, or kind of, mediating with family members, or, just practical things, getting cups of tea, getting the right bed, and he also does a lot of kind of, I would not like psychological work, but preparing the person mentally for what they're facing. So she'll do mindfulness meditation, or she'll do readings with them, or recommend books. And often it's just kind of looks like nothing, which is the most significant part of her work, which is just sitting with them and just being there while they're kind of staring down the barrel of what's about to happen. And so it's an unflinching kind of, she says, my job isn't to make anyone cheer anyone up. It's to sit with them in the hole. Like, she's sitting with them. So, yeah, that's what Annie does. She's just a remarkable individual. She's had a remarkable life, a huge amount of adversity and trauma. She's in her 60s now. And, I think that's the person, when I think about myself, who I would want with me at that stage is not somebody who had a perfect life, but somebody who, walked through the fire and was still going, and is able to kind of sit with you with no bullshit and kind of get closer to whatever it is that's scaring you. So yeah, that was remarkable. But I didn't really. So it had been about a year and a half of working, interviewing her and listening to her, asking her questions, and she's very unguarded. She's completely honest. She's just wonderful to talk to, and I didn't really understand what it took to emotionally or physically do the work until she introduced me to Katrina, which was, she doesn't use the word client. These are the people that she helps. And Katrina was willing to make time at the end of her life to let me in and talk to me and explain why she wanted to have Annie there. And only in watching Annie in action, helping Katrina and her family, and seeing Katrina's bravery and having this death that she really wanted, an unmedicated kind of death at home with her family, could I really understand just how significant Annie's work is and really what it takes to be able to do it.
Mm. In the first half of the book, when we're learning about Annie and her work, you refer to the idea of socialized silences, which is a term that really stayed with me. And it dawns on me that a lot of what you write about in the book can really fall under that category. You know, you write about, we've talked about death and grief, but UFOs, you know, paranormal experiences, things we can't explain. Why don't those socialized silences work for us? You write about that really well in the book. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, it's that we kind of not very good at sharing our vulnerabilities. And, we're told that to express fear or weakness or sadness is somehow a moral failing or a character flaw. You're not being positive, or you're not trying. And so we have these kind of silences for things that can't just be explained away. This vulnerability that we really can't do anything about. I mean, we are going to die. What could you do with that? And instead of being frank about it, it's like, don't talk about the war. So that's fine, and perhaps for certain contexts, but at a certain point, it becomes too heavy to carry, and really does the opposite of what we use it to do. So yeah, that was my interest in it, because it just seems so radical to be talking.
Sarah, can you hear me? For me, Sarah has frozen. Leona, can you still hear Sarah?
She's frozen for all of us, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I think she has. I'm going to try and send her a message to see if it's her internet.
Okay. We'll just all sit tight. Sorry, everyone. These things happen. There she is. She's coming back. She's just on mute.
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
Hi, I'm so sorry. Is this working? Can you see me?
Yep.
Is it?
Yep, working beautifully. We can see you. We can hear you. We're all
Okay, I
tight.
can't see anybody, but I can just
Oh, wait, we can see you beautifully.
now I can see you. I don't mean to get creepy about this, but like whenever I do talk about this stuff, my phone shorts out. If you read the book, you'll see that this happens when I talk about certain things. I also just have faulty technology, but I apologize to everybody.
No, but in a moment, I actually would love you to read for everyone that fantastic section, which I think is page 44, about all of our own human biases. It's something that Sarah writes about in the book really well, where she says that, well, we talk about all the different things that encourage humans to try and make patterns and make meaning of things, and that we're real meaning makers. You know, we just insist on seeing patterns often when they're not there. And I think you showcase some really interesting research in the book about how when we feel out of control or when we feel fearful, we're more likely to see more things that aren't there. We make more illusory patterns, and that the more self-affirmed we are, the less we see them. But you have this fantastic section. Can you read it to us?
Yes.
All the different ways that humans like to kind of mash up reality, I think is the way I would put it.
Yes, this is in the context of the ghost chapter, I think, or was it? Where is it? Hold on.
I think it might be ghost chapter, yeah.
So it's page 44?
Page 44 to 45, yeah.
Gotcha, okay. And the sound is working okay? Because I had to do this for
Perfectly.
Apologies again, everybody. All right. We may be the only animals who can think about our thinking, but that doesn't mean we can be relied on to do it particularly well. The only discomfort we tolerate worse than not knowing is knowing. A cognitive bias is a pattern of deviation from rational judgment, and the list of our deviations is long. No one is exempt. We privilege information that confirms our preconceptions, confirmation bias, react to disconfirming evidence by strengthening our pre-existing beliefs, backfire effect, ignore the obvious, ostrich effect. We prefer consensus to critical evaluation, conformity bias, refuse to mentally metabolize that which has not yet happened to us, normalcy bias. We assume the world is fundamentally just and rationalize injustice as something the victim deserved, attribution bias. But we become more sympathetic as our similarity to the victim increases, the pain of others flashing past us and into the distance like a siren in the night, egocentric bias. And all while thinking that we alone see reality as it is, unbiased and objective. Reality is a shelter that we continuously augment with distraction and deception, insistence and belief. This landed us on the moon, but it could kill us before our time.
Such a great section of the book. And it's such a great, terrifying list of all the ways that we, as you say, we try and we don't wrap ourselves around reality. We try and warp reality to fit the way we want to see the world. I wanted, before we move on to something else, I wanted to ask as well, when you were putting the book together and when you were thinking after 4 years of research and talking to people about all these different people you'd interviewed, did you find, we talked about the things people were searching for, but did you find commonalities between the way some of them thought about the world? Were there commonalities in worldview that surprised you, say between the creationists like Ken Ham, the Australian, and Rob Tilley, who was investigating paranormal activity?
Well, not in the kind of direct sense, but in a more in a deeper sense, yes, because I saw each of the stories kind of sitting on a continuum of rationality. You could put the kind of evangelical scientists at one end, and Annie and Lynn at the other end. And kind of depending on what they were talking about, and even things like the particular day or the context, it was kind of getting further away from reality into these increasingly elaborate, intellectualized structures to try very hard to make sense of what they wanted to be true. Or there was an approach like Annie and like Lynn, which kind of got closer to the things that they wished weren't true, but they had stories that were spacious enough to kind of allow for that. And they didn't allow that kind of disappointment to govern their worldview. So it was, instructive because they're all at the end of the day talking about similar things, death, disappointments, the unknown. But what they did with them was very different. But yeah, there were elements of wishful thinking that I think united certain UFO researchers with certain ghost hunters and certain, religious people that I was speaking to. Yeah, and I think that was a very human impulse. I see it even in my own life.
Definitely. I wondered as well, just saying it for a little bit longer with the Mennonites and with the creationists as well, that we've seen this massive decline in people's adherence to belief in religious institutions over the last 10, 20, 30 years. Do you feel, and so, you're not doing a longitudinal study, I know that's not what this book is, but do you feel like that's made this sense that of people's desire to find meaning in something that's godly, has it sort of untethered it from something? At least with the framework of a church or a religious institution, you kind of had parameters, and now you don't even have that. You have people saying, why do you belong to a church? So it's just sort of further and further ostracized.
Yeah, I think that there's it definitely fills a basic human need to belong to something. And there are these kind of elements of tribalism that could be used for both good and bad. And it's funny because, when you think of the potential inherent in our increased connectivity, there could have perhaps been, a role for that to use that to kind of draw us closer together. But instead, we are increasingly siloed and, sitting on the toilet looking at our phones and pictures of people's lunch. So, we failed there. And so, what then fills that space? So, yeah, there was a very strong sense, and I think I write about it later in the book, of feeling quite jealous of many of these people that ascribed to, the whole monolithic theory of whatever they were talking about,
because they had these beautiful systems of belonging, very confident, only ever getting, confirmation from the world that what they believed in was correct. And
that what they were doing was right.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a very, who's to say that that's that they're worse off than somebody who's skeptical.
We've been talking a lot about the beliefs of particular people and particular groups, whether, as you say, like Annie and Lynn, we'll talk about Lynn in a moment, down one end, and kind of Ken Ham and the Mennonites up the other end, so to speak. But, one big thing that's another big, very beautiful strand in the book that you draw out is not just self-belief, but what it's like for people who have strong self-belief when they try and deal with people who don't hold the same beliefs.
Yeah.
So that kind of I guess it's a version of relatedness. I can manage my own, they can't manage their own contradiction because they don't have contradiction. You write about that. There's a very searing and quite upsetting story early on of a beautiful young woman who's reading a Mennonite who's reading a story to her son. And she's got these tiny children. She's got like 6 children with a 7th on the way. And she's telling him a story that they're reading together from the Bible about how a son disobeyed his father and the father stoned the son to death, or this child was stoned to death. And she reads it almost like we would read, a Julia Donaldson or some other kind of, very straightforward kind of book, like, well, sweetheart, he did misbehave and he did disobey his father, and so he had to be stoned to death. It was like something out of The Handmaid's Tale for me. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how different people that you met experience that relationship to the other, because that seems to be at the core of this, that we're all sharing this planet at the same time, and and if you look at the people in your book, holding vastly, wildly different views of what the world is and our place in it.
Yeah. So kind of like one of the themes, I talk about Martin Buber and his theory of, true meetings. And so, he's a German Jewish philosopher, and his, writing was preoccupied with this idea that when we can truly see each other as, not just the other, but another I, then we can kind of overcome our subjectivities. We can have this true meeting where we're each met in our differences, and we can create something bigger. And then in opposition is the world that many of us live in, where you open your social media page and there's just no actual dialogue, but everyone is kind of projecting their fears, or very angry, and often I think, like, rightly so. And so it was a theme for me to sit with these people that held, very different beliefs to me, but often, in that instance, they thought I was going to hell, which, makes certain things uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, we were able to have many conversations about, many things, and try to constantly be trying to connect across distance. So, I write about, how, it's, lucky to have found the Mennonites, but it's not luck that was my curiosity in them. I'm always trying to establish this connection across distance. So what is it in me that's seeking that? Yeah.
I think as well, there's something, you mentioned it before, that, that some people say, to write this kind of book, you have to be this kind of objective, the eye of God. And that your way of weaving yourself in, some people think is narcissistic. I don't at all. I feel like it's honest. And as I said in my introduction, the intimacy that you kind of share with us is very genuine. It doesn't feel like it's constructed in a way other than well written, to elicit some kind of response. And you were very honest in this book. You did it a bit in The Trauma Cleaner, but you were very honest in this book about making references to people you met and things you experienced, and how they resonated with your own life and your own sense of loss. Personally, how did you kind of integrate that as a writer and as a person? Has that changed for you, having written this book and met these people?
I don't think so. I mean, it's important when you're writing a book that you provide some sense of redemption, that this was all worth something, and that, but it's always going to be messier than that. So I include myself because that's genuinely what, when these people were talking about grief and loss and disappointment, it would evoke in me these very strong memories of, okay, we have vastly different experiences, but I know what it's like to feel that way. I know what it's like to want to push, against reality and wish that there was something different. I know what it's like to, blame oneself, uh, because at least that would make sense when you're, subject to great unfairness that you can't control. So it would be like, how can I access, an emotional feeling that would provide some connection and allow me to understand what they were saying. So yeah, that's why that's in there. I think ethically it feels like a sort of a contract. I'm asking these people to often be very vulnerable with me, and so I put that in there as well. And my great hope is that less that it heals something within me, although I feel it does have that kind of a therapeutic effect. We know that the lessons of therapy are bedded in through creative practice. So the fact that I get to write professionally in this type of a weird genre, I feel has given me a huge gift of being able to kind of work with difficult emotions in myself. But more than that, like my great goal is not really to solve anything or for it to be better, or it's really that the readers might see themselves at first in the mirror of myself, in order that they might see themselves in the mirror of these people that maybe they would never have been concerned with their story. Maybe they would never have looked twice. And so if I can kind of achieve something towards that end, I think that goes towards resolving what is otherwise a very messy situation of we're all believing completely different things. There's no common ground at all. Intellect alone doesn't move the world, and here we are completely alone and talking to ourselves. So hopefully formally, at least, or structurally or technique wise, I could try to be like arguing for a kinder way of doing things.
Can we talk a bit about Lynn? She comes to us she's the first page of the second half of the book. Can you tell people a bit about her story, if you can, without kind of spoiling it for us?
Yeah. So Lynn was incarcerated for 35 years at the age of 35 for murdering her abusive husband. But I don't feel like I'm giving away anything there. That's not the big reveal. And the circumstances of that killing were such that were she to be tried for that offense today, instead of in the early 80s, it's likely it wouldn't have been considered murder. But she did serve not just her sentence, but an additional 10 years in punishment for the nature of the crime. So she was denied parole because they considered her act to be so heinous. And I met her 4 months after she was released. And she's a wonderful person, very smart, very hilarious, but she's not an angry person. And this is what I kept coming back to. I couldn't really metabolize it because I kept thinking, that was me. And, half my life was wasted because of this abusive man who threatened myself and our child. I would carry such anger. And so how is it possible that she doesn't? What's the story she's telling herself about the life that she's led? And so, that was 4 years of talking and learning from her. And then there was this idea that, there's a different way of doing it. We could tell ourselves a story that, didn't separate us from others or ourselves.
And she seems to be somebody who's very invested in service. So not dissimilarly to the people you met who were part of a church, who also, although their service serves a function, which is to proselytize, to bring in people who will believe, to encourage people to believe what they believe. But she's got this very interesting thing that reminded me of Katrina, who's in the first half of the book, about taking responsibility, about living with personal responsibility and imbuing all of your acts with that sense of taking responsibility. And you've touched on it a bit, but with someone like Lynn, do you think people can become like that? They can learn that skill over time? Or do you think she kind of inherently was just somebody born like that?
I think she would probably say that she had elements of it, but that it was a skill that she became better at over time. And I think that Annie would also have that advice that you can become that, it's a skill that you practice, like meditation is a practice. It's all just practice, and failure is built into that. But we can always get a little closer. We can always improve the way that we think about things. And I feel I've gotten an element of that just by having their example of such extreme circumstances.
Yeah, but it was remarkable to see in action.
Mm. I wanted just to remind people that soon we're going to come to your questions in a couple of minutes or whenever. But if you feel like you've got a question that you want to put to Sarah, please pop it in the chat box and we'll get to them really soon. We haven't really touched on the UFOs and things you can't explain, paranormal as well, but I was very struck by, there are some fantastic stories in the book about a lot of Australian sightings of either UFOs or inexplicable things. Why are we humans so obsessed with strange things? Why are we so obsessed with things that we can't explain to ourselves? As you said at the beginning of this conversation, on the one hand, we're just determined to have certainty. On the other hand, we're really drawn to the idea of like, I don't know, it could be something. I'm not sure.
I think it's this like inherent, story making function that we all have. We favor accuracy, certainty over accuracy. So, we need this cognitive closure. Like, are we alone in the universe? Is that scarier than thinking that perhaps we're not alone in the universe? And, we can poo-poo the ghost stories, and yet everyone has a ghost story. And again, it was this kind of push me, pull you of all of these things reside in the brains of the people that I know and people that I don't know who I get closer to. And so, what does it mean? And, I think we know, well, I feel it as a writer, but I felt it first as a reader that, we want closure. We want things to make sense. We want to be told it's okay and that it all resolves happily. We want to believe that of ourselves. We don't deal well with making our own meaning and making our own mess. And, there's a Murakami quote in the book, the existential reality of non-existence. So, if this all is for nothing, then what are we here for? And, I find all these questions and the infinite variety of answers fascinating, because everyone I speak to was, absolutely convinced that they'd figured it out.
Mm. Jumping around a bit before we come to people's questions, I wondered when, as you talked about social media, and when you open up social media at the moment and people are angry and they're yelling, we talked about socialized silences, but we've also got, I think, a lot of yelling. And I feel like we're in this moment where it's almost incapable for people to exchange ideas in a kind of civil way. There's like that civil conversation is lacking. And I wondered, do you think we're at some kind of apex of cultural and political misunderstanding? Or do you think it's, from all the people you've spoken to and all the stories you've collated, has it always been thus, but now we just have social media to show us how big our differences are?
Yeah, I think it would be the latter. I think maybe there would have been some slight devolution because we've lost, traditional structures that were, invisibly violent in a number of ways, but, held a sort of social cohesion by force. But I would be very loath to say anything like it's getting worse, or it's never been this bad. We've got, genocides going back, thousands of years. And, I think anybody who's surprised about what this says about our tendencies, our social tendencies, was probably just lucky enough to not see it before. Mm-hmm. But maybe we're presented with a unique way of meeting it, or like, as Annie would say, getting a little closer, doing it a little bit better. Because we do have these little, ready access to people's lives, and communication is easier. So maybe that's got some value. I don't know.
Do you think we can be retrained to learn to listen and accept difference, or think about difference differently?
I have to believe the answer to that is yes. I don't think improvement would be like the kind of, it's all better now, we fixed it. But I think that there would be huge gains in even just getting a tiny bit better, or thinking again, or thinking about our thinking, and still fucking up, but at least having tried just a little bit harder. I think, foremost, that we should expect that of ourselves before anybody else. Yeah.
I think it's a Hannah Arendt quote early in the book where you talk about that when humans actually really, for the first time in their lives, or in that first wave, come to terms with just how different other people are.
Yeah.
It seems a gulf too big to kind of bridge. But
yeah.
I love that so much of the book is about not giving us ideas for how to do it, but just kind of, it's like almost whisperings of how we might, as you say, see more of the I in the other, the I, not the I. But, yeah. I'm going to remind everyone, if you have questions for Sarah, I'm happy to keep going with her because she's wonderful. But if you have questions you'd like to put to her, that is great. And we'd love to hear from you. Pop them in the chat box or send them through, and Leona can send them through to us as well. I did want to ask a COVID-y question, which I like to try and avoid. But I feel like, we've had, on top of all the things you're talking about, of people, and many of the stories in the book go back decades and decades, of people who experience things as children, or things they couldn't explain in their 20s and they're now 70, or people have changed careers. I wondered, we've now all had a year everywhere in the world of this very extreme kind of social isolation, and also in being online all the time, being in our own kind of echo chamber or little bubble. And I wondered, do you think, because you were too, you wrote for 4 years, you were able to travel, and then you got stuck like everybody. Do you feel at all like the COVID experience has affected or reinforced how we communicate our ideas and beliefs? Has it hardened some of our beliefs about, well, this is how I see the world and this must be right? Do you have any sense of that?
Like, I just think it's kind of given us a different basket to put the same kind of rivalries in, to some extent. Things that you wouldn't have thought would be politicized, like the masks or vaccines or all of that. We're suddenly just the locus for all of our anger about the fear of this and the uncertainty of it. We kind of just turned it against each other. But I do think, like, doing this at home, and there's the noise of our house and the messiness of our lives and technological failures, and I'm not wearing the right pants that I would wear if we were sitting together in public, no shoes. It's kind of stripped away those defenses, because we've all kind of gone through a similar thing. So I think we're able to see each other in more human terms in some ways. But that's kind of been balanced out by, yet again, an opportunity to kind of see that we're all in it together has been just, weaponized. So that seems more pessimistic than I am. But yeah, I think that it has definitely changed things more than it hasn't. But we've seen some disappointing and familiar disappointments.
I think that's true. I haven't seen any questions pop up. This does happen from time to time. People are just enjoying hearing the author speak, and we're just going to keep rolling until you throw a question at us. One person did say earlier in our conversation, when I was talking about death cafes, someone said death cafes aren't just for people who are 6 months away from dying, which is something I said flippantly. We're all going to die, so they're for everyone, which is absolutely true. You're very frank in the book about moments where you become not overwhelmed, but very affected by something that's happening. At one point, you're interviewing Katrina, who is dying, and she says, she notices that you tear up, and she says, what's going on for you? And I wondered if you could talk a bit about what that was like to sit with people and their stories, and the response you had to that, and being noticed by them in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. It was the hardest it was the hardest of anything I've ever written.
It's so beautiful.
Thank you. The pressure to want to do her justice on the page, because she's such a remarkable person, was great. And there is always, I think it's just reflexive if you come from an academic background and you write factually, that you do try to erase yourself. I'm always keenly aware that these people are giving me their time. That the balance is, yes, we're having a conversation, but it's me who's interested in them and not vice versa, and that's as it should be. But she was just, and Annie as well, and also Lynn, like, concerned with the fact that this was a conversation. It really did feel like a conversation, and so she never lost sight of who else was in the room, regardless of what she was going through. So yeah, it was really just sad. She's got a 16-year-old son, and she had other children, older sons as well, and her husband I got to know, and there were times when I was like, I'm not quite sure that I can do this. But I think of the writers that have written about similarly difficult material and who kept going, and there's always value in keeping on going. And I also just, at the end of the day, need to pay respect to the fact that she made this time for me to be there. So there was always that kind of impetus. But yeah, very really difficult.
And you describe a bit about Katrina's life and background. I realized just as you were saying it that she was doing in that moment with you what she's always done, which is that she was a counselor. She
Yeah.
listened to people and she noticed people who were in pain or otherwise.
Mm.
And that didn't stop, even though she was in so much pain herself.
No,
And as a reader, sorry.
no.
I was going to say, as a reader, the emotion we can feel that you feel is a kind of a portal for us, because you're feeling you are. I was also feeling so churned up reading those sections. She's a fantastic woman, and you think the unjustness of her dying young or dying when she's happily partnered and she wants to see her kids grow up and she wants to go for eat a beautiful French meal and she wants to go to the ocean again. The kind of unjustness of all of that. But it's almost like we got to honor her life in the way that you wrote about her as well, which is quite unusual, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's also the emotional reality is part of the truth. So it's not just like the artistic reality. This is the landscape. So it's kind of all part and parcel. So there's that kind of journalistic impulse. You need to sanitize it, just the facts, ma'am. But then it's like, hold on, no, this is evoking in me. I just want to run. I'm so sad. I have to get out of here. And that's doing something. And she knew that because she had spent 20 years as a trauma counselor. So yeah.
There is a question that's coming from Trini. She says, and she's not sure if we covered it, and I'm hoping we understand what she means. She says, how does living in Australia affect your writing?
Oh.
And I know in the book, if Trini hasn't read it yet, that you do spend time with someone like Lynn in America, and you spent time with the Mennonites there, and you went to Kentucky as well. But how would you answer that question?
Oh yeah. So I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, I have all of my both my books and most of my other writing are, Australian stories. The American stories were the ones that I was, kind of had access to while I was there. I haven't considered. I don't know how it does affect my writing. I'm sure it does affect my writing, of course. Being a writer in Australia is a different experience than being a writer elsewhere. But I mean, it's all, there's so many factors that go into, the kind of work we get to do and the stories we get to write about. I'll have to think about it. I really don't have a neat answer to that, but thank you, because it is worth thinking about. An interesting related talk on that topic is Maria Tamarkin's State of the Writing Nation, which I think is available on the Wheeler Center. And she talks about the experience that is, I think, the dominant experience for most working writers in Australia. And it's incredibly powerful. I think Maria's the best writer writing anywhere in the world today. And it's kind of a spoken essay. So it's the State of the Writing Nation, and that's Maria Tamarkin on the Wheeler Center website. So she probably says everything better than I could say anything.
She's wonderful, but we need you all. We need you all speaking and writing. You kind of open the book and you close the book with this idea. It's a fantastic line. It's your line, which is that we are united in the emotions that drive us into the beliefs that separate us. I'm going to say it one more time for people who haven't read the book. We are united in the emotions that drive us into the beliefs that separate us. I love it. It's such a doozy, and it's so at the heart of everything. I wondered if you could reflect before we finish. We've got time for one or two more. How, if we can, how do we undo that problem? How do we untangle that relationship between belief that gives us solace and then separates us from everybody else, which causes more suffering?
Like, I think, this call that I think it's less about being honest with each other and more about being honest with ourselves. It takes a really long time to put down the stories that we've needed to tell ourselves in order to feel brave or equipped to deal with, daily life or life at all. But I think many of us are stronger than we would at first believe, and that we're strongest without these limiting, complete monolithic stories. So it's hard for people that like to read and, like to write to think that the solution might be doing less thinking and less justification, less rationalizing, and more kind of this, again, the death doula, Annie, just sitting, getting a little closer to everything that scares us. And there's that James Baldwin quote in the book that, if we can't be trusted to live with ourselves, we can't be trusted to live with anyone else, because we project, we transfer, we externalize all of our internal roiling discomfort.
our angers and our frustration and our grief onto everyone else. They're the enemy. It's because of this. Anger is a safe story. But, those emotions really can't be accurately decanted into something so neat. And so it would really be about, how do we become more honest with ourselves and just a little bit braver. I think a lot of that work is done through reading. I mean, I really think, reading things that challenge us, looking again at what we haven't been reading and why, and kind of at least trying to go against what seems safe in our normal range of impulses, to see if there might be a more practiced way of being in the world.
My very last question, early in the book, Annie, the death doula, talks about really painful things in her life. And she says, oh, that was a great teacher. And you say it makes your blood run cold. But by the end of the book, you say being in the room with Katrina was a great teacher. You talk about those things that were great teachings for you. And I wondered if we could close by asking you to tell us, what moments that you experienced that are in this book that you've written about have offered you great learning or great teachings.
Yeah. So when Annie says, something's a great teacher, it's like when the dentist says, oh, you're going to feel some sensitivity, and there's going to be some searing pain. You'll hit the ceiling and it'll be atrocious. Definitely, Katrina, first and foremost, just, seeing her celebrate her life at her living wake, seeing her kind of persist in this humongous wish for herself to meet her death unmedicated and experience what that was like. I mean, that was just the privilege of a lifetime to be close enough to see her, move towards that and then do it. Sitting with Annie and talking about all of these things as though she was going to offer me some sort of, it's all better now. It's like, this is the trick to be actually happy with it, rather than, being well with something just means creating more space for it in your life, in your story. There's nothing that's going to make it a good thing or a happy thing. You'll just become more accustomed to sharing the room with whatever scares you. That was a wonderful teacher. I mean, I can't say that the ghost hunters were, because I still remain creeped out enough to not want to go to the bathroom by myself. And there's another book that is just me being too scared to go to the loo. I think anyone would read that.
It's the next short story. It's fine.
And Lynn, talking to her as, she, is finds her way in a world that has gone on without her, and really kind of creates a home for herself. In the absence of everything that she had up until that point that I met her, where I was the same age she was when she had gone into prison. Everything she had expected and worked for was taken away. And, seeing that there was another possibility on the other side. It wasn't going to look like what it should have looked like, but it was going to perhaps be doing something more important. So those were all really confronting, really difficult things, but I feel absolutely privileged because they've taught me things about myself and about life that I feel fortified me in certain ways.
And I think we feel fortified by them because of the way that you wrote about them. So I want to say on behalf of everyone here tonight, thank you for The Believer. It's a beautiful book and a powerful book and a thought-provoking book in all the best ways. I want to thank everyone who is here tonight. I wish we could have all been in the same room. We will be one day soon, although it's lovely to be able to talk to Sarah, who is in Melbourne. And I think, I'm not sure if Leona wants me to hand back to her, but I just wanted to say that, these are great events, and keep your eyes open for the next ones, because it's fantastic to support your favorite independent booksellers. But from yeah, thank you very much. Leona, do you want to say something?
Yeah, just thank you so much for such a wonderful conversation. It was honestly a joy to just be able to sit here and take it all in. This is a wonderful book. A massive congratulations to you, Sarah. And again, thank you both for such a marvelous conversation. I think I speak for everyone when I say we're just so grateful for both the book and for everything that's just transpired, because it's
thank you for having. Thank you, Michaela, and I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. I mean, this is
it wouldn't be 2021 without them. But,
Thank you.
Thanks
guys.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye.